What we perceive as opposition, what we perceive as stress and pressure, is really our own resistance to events. Hi, I'm Grant Kleiman from Darsana Martial Arts. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to support us or join our online academy, there are links in the description. This is Tao Te Ching, chapter 10, reading from Stephen Mitchell's interpretation. And I think you'll find that this chapter may be one of the most direct in terms of its instruction as far as how we can apply it to our practice, and especially what we were talking about today. Here we go. Can you coax your mind from its wandering and keep to the original oneness? Can you let your body become supple as a newborn child's? Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? Can you love people and lead them without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control. This is the supreme virtue. So particularly those of you who are a little bit more advanced in your practice, I think you will see very quickly how this pertains precisely to our practice. But let's take it line by line, because of course it's more than just instruction for how to practice Tai Chi Chuan, but how to practice Tai Chi off the mat and in life. So the first line that talks about keeping to the original oneness, I think that we can understand this initially in our practice in terms of the interconnectedness of the body. You could argue that Wu Ji is a state in which everything gathers into oneness. It's undifferentiated. Wu Ji literally means essentially without extremes. You could say without sides, without poles, without positive and negative. In other words, without distinction. So Wu Ji is a state in which everything is one. And one of the first things that I personally experienced through meditation and ultimately saw bear out more and more as true through Tai Chi practice is this sense of oneness of everything. It's very easy initially to perceive distinction, and that's what we spend most of our life doing. It's a little bit harder to see everything as an interconnected, inextricable whole. We've talked about this before in terms of biology, how in biology, when they describe an organism, it came to describe it in terms of the organism within its environment, because you really can't describe an organism outside of its environment. And in the same way, I couldn't draw your face without drawing your head. And while I could draw your head without drawing the rest of your body, it would be easily understandable that that wasn't complete. You're not really a bunch of different parts. The idea of having parts is more just that we conceptually separate ourselves into bits and pieces. You aren't built, you grow. All is one thing. In our practice, by releasing tension, we can feel the body connect together. This whole thing we were talking about feeling motion inside the body like a swirling fluid. And the mind is what's moving that and moving with that. And the outer body's motion is more just a surface manifestation of that internal movement. All of that arises from this notion. When we are tense, it's kind of a manifestation of the way the mind separates the body into bits and pieces, into parts, and then we move this part or we move that part. And it makes us into this differentiated thing. So when you're learning the movements of the form, then you think, okay, in this movement, the hand goes out this way, the foot steps that way, and the torso turns this way. While that's not inaccurate, it's also not really accurate, because what's really happening is this whole fluid swirl or cloud of motion that is carrying through the whole body. And I've often used the analogy of a murmuration of starlings, those clouds of blackbirds swirl through the air in these undulating, changing clouds of flight. No clear leader, no clear follower. And it's a very fascinating phenomenon. And that's actually how we want to move. The whole body is suffused with consciousness, and the mind has this intention, and the whole body moves in the swirl. Moving beyond the body and moving into our perception of the rest of the world and the rest of life, we are not individuals in a vacuum, but rather a feature of the whole sort of undulating, pulsating event of life, of the world, of time and space. If you backed out with a broad enough view, both in space and in time, you would just see everything doing this kind of undulating, swirling thing. And the second line where it talks about become supple as a newborn child. I mean, this is almost too obvious, too on the nose as far as Tai Chi is concerned. But if we have any rigidity, right, we're back to that separate state. We want to become supple and flexible and malleable. We want to be able to adapt to whatever's happening. In the demonstration that I did, if I was rigid, when one of you pushed or pulled on me, I was the solid thing that was then hostage to whatever forces were acting upon me. But when I was flexible and supple, whatever forces were brought against me, I could just let them wave through my body. I could accept them and I could go with them instead of struggling against them. So what we perceive as opposition, what we perceive as stress and pressure, is really our own resistance to events. So having no rigidity is a little bit more obvious in the physical practice, but there's also a kind of innocence to this notion, to be as supple as a newborn baby. A baby doesn't have any suspicion about things, and it has no guile, right? It's not trying to find an angle, nor is it thinking that somebody else has one. It doesn't have that tenseness of concern. It's open and accepting to whatever's coming in. It's just a sponge. It's absorbing everything. It has no distinctions between good and bad. Everything just sort of is, and it goes with that and responds in accordance with that. The next line about cleansing your inner vision. The idea is getting it to be completely clear, completely unobstructed by anything that might block your perception. And the things that block our perceptions are our ideas and images about things. Looking inward, if we can perceive that sense of wholeness, that sense of oneness, both within ourselves as a complete being and our own connection to everyone and everything else, then the judgments we have towards things, to ourselves and also outwardly to the world and to other people, they begin to dissolve. You're not going to see things so starkly as good or bad when you realize that everything is part of the whole, that everything in a way plays its role and is a necessary part in the unfolding of all that happens. This comes back to that concept of acceptance. Being able to see clearly means not already having a firm stance on the way that you think things are or should be. And that's tough, but this is that impartiality we talked about in chapter 5. It's a hard thing to achieve, but we at least want that to be at the root of our awareness. If I'm really in the Wu-Ji state, if I'm in the state of unmanifest potential in my body and in my mind, when my partner in push hands, for example, pushes on me or pulls me or does something to me, if I already have a rigid position and a rigid stance, or I already have a judgment on whether what they're doing is good or bad, this is going to breed resistance in me. I'm going to try to stop him from doing the thing I don't want him to do or her to do. And this is going to cause a moment in me where I am not truly adapting and following what's going on. And we know in push hands that in order to save ourselves, in order to remain whole, we have to let ourselves go. And that means we have to change and adapt to what's going on, whether it's what we think we want or not. And if we can get rid of those ideas about, well, this is good and this is bad, and realize that to some degree everything is contextual, everything depends on the way you relate to it, then we can begin to move into a different mode of being where we're capable of maintaining ourselves while at the same time going with whatever's going on. In the fourth line where it says, can you lead people without imposing your will upon them? We can't control others. And imposing our will in an attempt to only breeds opposition, it breeds struggle, it breeds resentment. To lead someone properly, you must first follow. And this is what we were just saying. To understand who you would lead, you have to join with them. You have to be like them so that you are with them, and then you can lead them by example. In our push hands practice, we talk about following to join, joining to lead, and leading to redirect. There's this process where if somebody is pushing or pulling or moving in any way, We don't try to seize them and control them. We don't impose ourselves upon them. We don't insist upon our own position. Neither do we retreat. We showed that today, that running away is not the right thing, or ignore what they're doing and just do our own thing. We have to follow with them at first. But following means staying with. So I don't retreat away from them. But if they move toward me, I congruently move with them in that manner while maintaining my own balance. Once I've done that, by the virtue of doing that, I've joined with them. I'm not in opposition to them. And so there's no reason for them to struggle or change or resent what I'm doing or oppose me, because everything is unfolding in the way that they intended for things to unfold, or at least it seems to be that way. The result won't be what they expected. And by being with them, I can begin to sort of get ahead of them, to lead the way, to say, okay, we were going this way, and now I'm just infusing a little bit of my own intention, just enough. It's still congruent with theirs, but it's enough to begin to steer them in a different direction, a direction that's more helpful for me to maintain my balance. That will redirect their intention. So whatever it was they were trying to do becomes what I'm doing. So it went from following to leading. But when we try to lead from the onset, then we get resistance, we get struggle. It's very difficult, but there is a way we try through the practice to understand that we don't simply want to impose our will. And there's a sneaky little message in this chapter, that even when you have the power to make things go the way you want them to go, it's still better to go along with them at first, to find the grain in the wood, so to speak, to go along with the natural path. And through doing that, then you get to lead by example. The fifth line, can you let events take their own course? Can you let the most vital things happen without imposing your will upon them, by allowing them to unfold in their natural way? So this is obviously following the same theme the whole time. Our desire from control, it arises from a fear of loss. That tension that you feel when you're doing push hands with a partner in that moment where you think perhaps they might get you. And then what do? You grab on with more tension. You start to resist, and that just gives them a greater hold on you. In your form work, when you grab on to try to control where you're going, you're not achieving the goal. You're creating more tension in the effort to perfect what you were doing and make come about what you wanted to come about, rather than discovering the way it wants to unfold on its own. When we try to control what we fear or make happen what we want, we actually give prevailing forces more leverage upon us. By letting go and observing the natural course of things, we can find our proper place among them. Now, this requires a kind of faith, a faith in sort of the nature of being and the way that things unfold as they should. Standing in Wu Ji on some level requires a kind of faith, because to let go of tension, you have to trust that you're not going to fall down. That the nature of being is that you will remain standing. As a matter of fact, that you may achieve a greater balance. This is probably the most difficult lesson of Tai Chi. It's the most difficult lesson of Taoist philosophy. That by letting go, in a way, nature will catch you. And in doing that, you will discover who and how and what you really are, and be able to act from that authentic nature in a way that allows your capacities to manifest much more fully, allows you to be much more who you really are and what you really are. But we're so afraid of letting go of that we almost never let that happen. Only by stepping back from that controlling role do we end up seeing this. And this also is another interesting piece of the puzzle. It is our presence, more than our action, that provides our influence over things. We think we have to do something, but most of the time all we have to do is be there and be aware. And in doing that, our presence becomes the main ingredient of our participation in all events. So just by being there and being in our Wu Ji, we change what's going on. And then if there's something needed, we'll know, because it'll actually be needed for us to maintain our Wu Ji within the circumstances. This is the next line. Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? So by letting go of our notions of what should be or what we want to be or don't want things to be, we can more clearly perceive what they are. As long as you're trying to see in something what you want it to be or don't want it to be, You're not seeing what it is. We do this to ourselves all the time. We do this to other people all the time in our relationships with them. It's very hard because we get very attached, very emotionally attached to ideas about things. It's that whole notion of the image I've talked about before, that you have this idea, and that idea becomes a sort of filter, like a plastic clear sheet, and then we paint our own picture, pieces of it, and then we put that on top, and it superimposes our ideas on the actual image. This understanding also, I think it's important to understand, is sort of a wordless understanding. The ideas, the images, they're usually encapsulated in some kind of words and some kind of verbiage about things that we tell ourselves. When we get rid of all of that and we perceive something directly as it is, it's this sort of immediate awareness of things. And then we try to explain it. And then those explanations oftentimes can get in the way, so watch out for that. Understand that any way you think about something is not it. As in chapter 1, the Tao that can be told is not the true Tao. Don't confuse the map for the territory. Finally, it goes through that whole list, giving birth and nourishing things, having but not possessing them, having no expectations, not controlling, right? That's virtue, right? This is all a description of Wu Wei, doing without doing. That's what we were trying to capture within our Tai Chi practice today. This is a very challenging thing, but it's telling you that the way to go about things is to have no way that you're going about things. In other words, don't impose some notion and some structure. This is a tough thing to do because we have to kind of start somewhere and give us some structure. It's sort of like you almost have to have a structure to dissolve. So we learn the form and we learn the body mechanics and we learn the principles, but then understand that all of those things are just the boat taking you across the river. Get out of the boat because the real journey is on the other side.